To everyone.
A Home from Home on the Costa del Sol. Every Man, Sunday 10:35 on BBC One.
It's amazing what people will talk about in the hairdresser's chair. Modern Times secretly filmed from behind a few mirrors with hair-raising results on BBC Two shortly. Here on BBC One, Stephen Fry is one of this week's guests, joining the gang for another round of They Think It's All Over in an hour. And that's after the main evening news and campaign report from the BBC with Peter Sissons.
The longest campaign is over. Each party leader has rested his case. Tonight, number 10 stands empty, awaiting the nation's verdict on who will be entrusted with the seat of power. Loyalist prisoners in the maze continue their protest after talks get nowhere. And Britain's long-term drought is now the worst since records began. Good evening. After one of the longest election campaigns of the century, the last speeches have been made, the last interviews given, and the party leaders have made for their constituencies for the long wait while the votes are cast and counted. The polls open in 10 hours' time, and all three leaders, Paddy Ashdown, Tony Blair and Jon Major, have made last-minute bids for the votes of the undecided. Our political editor, Robin Oakley, has watched the final day of the campaign unfold.
Party leaders have personal contests to fight too. Making bumpy progress in his Sedgefield constituency tonight, Tony Blair knew Labour has to score a record post-war swing to achieve its first election victory in 23 years. Jon Major, needing to recover from the longest, deepest poll trough in post-war history, if the Tories are to hold on to power, had ended his nationwide tour on his home patch in Huntingdon. Earlier, at his final news conference, Mr. Blair had returned to his theme of leadership and trust. Labour, having changed itself, was ready to change the country.
The difference is that we have a reformed Labour Party today that is putting forward our contract with the British people and saying to them, trust us and judge us on the commitments we make. We've not been in power for 18 years. They have.
And was he excited about tomorrow?
I think it would be odd if there wasn't the milder sense of anticipation. Yes, I think that's, I think that would not be overstating it. And I mean, I don't want to be overbold, but I think I could agree with that.
At his headquarters, Mr. Major acknowledged that after 18 years, electors knew them warts and all. Yes, time for a change sounded appealing, but he urged voters not to be taken in by what he called Labour's marketing scam.
Tomorrow will be Britain's day of destiny. Low inflation, too good to give up. Low mortgages, too good to give up. Falling unemployment, too good to give up. Our economic success, too good to give up. Our United Kingdom, too good to give up. Don't take the risk. In one careless moment, don't throw our success away.
After his final campaign session at Conservative Central Office, the man who's not just headed the Tory campaign, but who's effectively been the Tory campaign, was cheered off by party workers. The Liberal Democrats, well pleased their costed promises on health and education have caught public attention, tickled journalists' palates today with a cocktail called Golden Dawn. Paddy Ashdown asked for enough MPs to add their flavour to the next Parliament.
Give us your vote. Give us your mandate, and armed with that vote and that mandate, we will fight for the things we have fought for through this campaign, right through the next Parliament.
There's increasing optimism in the Labour camp, growing resignation among Tories that it's too late to close the gap. But all parties reckon there are more undecided electors this time, so everybody's fighting to the last. Robin Oakley, BBC News, Westminster.
Mr. Major took to the stump to face the crowds in marginal Stevenage on the last day of his campaign. Our political correspondent Jon Sopel was with him.
Jon Major's final campaigning day, and the man who said that he'd be the one found in the middle of the crowd today nearly disappeared in it. A last-minute change of venue in Stevenage didn't stop well over 100 Labour and Tory supporters from entering a sometimes bad-tempered shouting match with much jostling beside. An egg was thrown which hit the Prime Minister's car, but Jon Major saw the whole episode as an opportunity.
And these people here, you can see it, they believe in Labour, they believe in more spending, they believe in trade unions, they believe in nationalisation. And they're out here to show their old Labour. What they're demonstrating against is as much Tony Blair's politics as anything else.
This was the most raucous reception seen since the start of the campaign, with Tories chanting 5 more years, while Labour supporters taunted him with the slogan, "One more day." Earlier, John Major went to Wembley and posed next to the FA Cup. At last, he offered a prediction, one that could cost him votes in Middlesbrough. It was that Chelsea would beat the Teesside club in the cup final. But as for the election, there was still everything to play for. After 6 gruelling weeks, the campaign drew to a close in Bedford, as it had begun in Luton, with a shopping centre and a chaotic scrum. Before he left, his aides had 2 messages to send out. One to the media, that the fight will go down to the wire. The other to his supporters, keep a steady nerve. This evening, John Major is back at his home here in Huntingdon, knowing that there's nothing he can do but await the verdict of the voters. His plan this evening, he's gone out for a family meal, and then he plans to return to watch a recording of the England-Georgia match. Peter.
John, sum up 6 weeks with John Major for us.
Well, I think he's loved every minute of the campaign itself. I think the frustration, and I think it's a deep frustration, is that he hoped that a long campaign would allow him to really tackle the big issues facing Britain. And I think there's a slight sense of frustration that that hasn't happened, and he knows that it's now down to people in the privacy of the polling booths tomorrow whether they re-elect him or not.
Jon Sopel, thank you. Tony Blair made a final push for votes on a campaign tour of Scotland and Teesside before returning to his constituency home. Our political correspondent Jeremy Vine reports.
Tomorrow, Mr Blair may be given the power to run the country, but he already has the power to bring Stockton Market to a standstill. The audience here heard him warn again, the election is not over yet. But the arguments are ending. For the first time in the campaign, there were no hecklers present.
Thank you.
The Labour leader came back to his constituency, Sedgefield, tonight, aware it is not just his own party workers who now see him as a surefire winner. But there were no fists in the air, and he was leaving nothing to chance.
24 hours to save our National Health Service, 24 hours to give our children the education they need in our schools, 24 hours to give hope to our young people, security to our elderly, 24 hours in which we can decide how we're going to build that decent, that great British society of which we've dreamt.
And this was the final sentence in Mr Blair's final speech of the election campaign.
Everything that we have tried to achieve has been achieved with this final purpose. Not to help the Labour Party, though we have helped it, but to help the country. We believe in our country. We believe it can be better. And we ask for the support of the British people to make it better, tomorrow and in the future. Thank you.
Some Labour staff on the campaign trail are still protesting, even in private. They actually can't believe, after so many years of defeat and opposition, their party looks like winning. But after what has been an almost flawless campaign, confidence is now exuding from Mr Blair and his aides. Peter, back to you in the studio.
Jeremy, what will be your enduring impression of the last 6 weeks?
Well, Mr Blair's just in the house behind me, and he may be thinking of his impressions. I think if you just watch the way, the vigour with which cameramen were shepherded around on the campaign trail, it gave you some idea of the professionalism behind this Labour campaign. I think in a sense it was driven by the fear when it started that perhaps their lead was built solely on Conservative negatives, and they had to get across what they stood for. So no matter that Sleaze and Europe came up for a time, day after day they were back on their key issues as they saw them: the NHS, crime and education. And there were days on the bus when we would say, well, what's the story today? And they would say, well, it's the same story as yesterday. They stuck very much to their themes.
Jeremy Vine, thank you. For the Liberal Democrats, Paddy Ashdown spent the day on a flying tour of West Country target seats. Our political correspondent Carolyn Quinn reports.
Unfortunately, they're not old enough to vote, but the cheers from these children from the appropriately named Ashdown School in Dorset were still welcome to the Liberal Democrat leader.
Nice to see you.
He ended his 17,000-mile election odyssey with a whirlwind tour around yet more target constituencies in the south and west. Recalling one famous quote from his predecessor, Sir David Steele, Paddy Ashdown corrupted it somewhat to deliver his own message.
Go back to your constituency office and prepare to distribute more leaflets.
Paddy Ashdown won't say how many seats he's confident of winning, but a senior colleague who joined him for one leg of the tour wasn't so shy.
I think in Devon and Cornwall they get a majority of the seats in this region. It's hard to predict for the rest of the country, but my own prediction is somewhere above 40.
Above 40?
Yes.
Paddy Ashdown's...
I've even put a bet on that.
Tonight, a rally in Torquay marked the final stage of the campaign and a last chance to air some well-worn phrases. With investment in education a core theme for the Liberal Democrats, Paddy Ashdown dismissed those who said it was unaffordable.
The pundits and the commentators and the press, and I love them all, tell us that it would have been electoral suicide to tell people you want to pay more tax for better education. But it is national suicide not to. I fancy that we have struck a chord with the spirit of our country, because everyone knows that in the real world you don't get something for nothing.
Well, that final rallying speech finished here in Torquay. Paddy Ashdown's now on his way back to Yeovil to spend tomorrow in the constituency. In just over 24 hours' time, he'll know if the breakthrough he's been predicting for his party can become a reality. Peter.
He's done enough miles during this campaign, Carolyn. Has it been that tiring for everyone with him?
Well, it's a very interesting campaign, I have to say. So many helicopters and planes I've never been in the space of 4 weeks. But there is a certain energy about Paddy Ashdown that he's renowned for. I think the most important thing, though, for them at the moment is that they feel that they are doing far better at this point in the campaign than they were at the same point in 1992. That's led to a very buoyant mood in the Liberal Democrat camp, and they are convinced that 30 seats would be good. Anything less than that, a disappointment.
Carolyn Quinn, thank you. And joining us now to discuss some of the key policy issues which have emerged during the campaign are Peter Jay, the BBC's economics editor, and our social affairs editor, Niall Dickson. Neil, social issues, pensions, schools, health generated a lot of heat during this campaign, but how much light, how much clearer has the campaign made the issues?
Well, normally you expect the governing party to be the safe option, the predictable pair of hands. I think the Conservatives have confounded that theory a bit by being arguably the most radical on education. They've produced the first serious challenge to the comprehensive school system, which has prevailed for 25 years, offering the prospect, the possibility of a grammar school in every town. On social services, they've said old people's homes, day centres could be moved out of the public sector into private and voluntary organisations. And of course, they've produced this radical scheme for pensions, whereby young people could build up their own fund and would have to thereby be able to do without the state retirement pension. Labour, by contrast, have been more cautious. Their big idea, 250,000 young people off welfare and into work, otherwise saying we can make this system better, we can get smaller class sizes, shorter waiting lists. The Liberal Democrats, well, they in a sense have stolen old Labour's clothes with a tax and spend, saying we can do better in education and a little better in health.
Peter Jay, who won the economic argument?
Well, the Conservatives obviously started with the belief that this was their issue. Booming Britain was their slogan, even if the Chancellor wasn't entirely happy about the words. And during the campaign, they got two very good sets of figures on inflation and growth. And obviously there will, when it comes to the point, still be many, many people who think that they are perhaps safer at the end with the Conservatives. But Labour undoubtedly had some success in neutralising this issue. They were able, by making that commitment very early this year, to adopt Ken Clarke's tax and spend policies, lock, stock and barrel, to make it rather difficult for the Conservatives to make stick their usual argument that Labour would ruin the boom that Britain was enjoying.
You're not saying it's a draw, then?
Well, perhaps an away draw for Labour in one sense, because to neutralise the issue that has, at least for nearly the last 20 years, been regarded as the Conservatives' most powerful issue, is in that sense a success for Labour. And of course the Liberal Democrats also enjoyed the opportunity to differentiate themselves very clearly from the two major parties by being the only people who were willing to come right out and talk about the need for a tax increase. Whether that wins them votes or merely brownie points for integrity, time alone will show.
Once the election is out of the way, is it going to be relatively plain sailing for whoever occupies the Treasury?
No, certainly not. There are a series of very big questions that will have to be decided very quickly. Do interest rates have to go up in order to head off inflation? Do taxes have to go up in order to balance the budget? What is going to be done about the single currency? Will the very strong pound kill off the recession before it's even halfway complete? Can we afford the welfare state without a rising tax burden? All these questions need to be addressed very urgently indeed, and only really can be once the election is over.
Niall Dickson, they sell us different social visions, the main parties, but all come up against economic reality. Would that be fair?
Yes, it's true, and they are different visions. A lot of people talk about the parties all being the same. It's clear that in the social sphere, the Conservatives are committed to rolling back the frontiers of the state in the social field, as they've already done in the business field. Labour and the Liberal Democrats still see a role for the state and for the public sector. So 5 years of Labour government or 5 years more of Conservative government would produce a different social landscape in Britain.
Niall Dickson, Peter Jay, thank you both very much. There'll be more news from the campaign trail later in the programme, including a late move in the opinion polls. But now, the rest of the day's news. Talks will resume tomorrow to try to end news as voters prepare to elect the next occupant of number 10. What has shaped the men who want to run Britain? And what does that tell us of their ability to lead? But first, over to Anne Perkins at our Westminster campaign desk for her final election roundup.
Evening, Peter. Despite the flying visit by John Major to Northern Ireland yesterday, there's no sign of a resumption of what on mainland Britain would be considered normal politics. The contest there is, as it has been for a whole generation, between unionists and nationalists.
I don't like the way they've done that first column. Yes. By extending.
An election strategy meeting of the main unionist party, but not for tomorrow. For the next poll here, local elections in 3 weeks' time. Ulster votes often, almost always by politico-religious affiliation, almost never by ideology.
We have to try to spell out to people how we think politics in Northern Ireland can progress and how we can construct a society that people can be comfortable with within the Union. People are looking for a forward-looking approach that is reasonable, that they can relate to, that they don't have to feel ashamed of.
Nothing like the fresh vegetables, Doctor, to keep up the constitution.
That's right. But it's not vegetable eating that made you fat.
Big man, big appetite, big personal vote. Yet while 2 of his party's 3 seats are under threat, he remains bullish.
I think it's an election for change. And people are saying we're going to change. And we have sent so many people of one party to Westminster and got nowhere. Now the time is to let other people have a chance, especially in the unionist camp.
Neither unionist party will sit in the same television studio with Sinn Féin. The main nationalist party will, and also the one party which claims genuine cross-community support. Its view is at once bleak and hopeful.
This, I think, has been more a fear election than a hope election. People are very frightened by what happened last year and what might happen this year. That's what's coming back on the doorsteps. Some people will allow their fear to drive them to the extremes. But I think there are many people who are saying we're so frightened of the extremes that we're going to point the road to the future. And that is the road through the centre.
I found great hope, some apprehension, some, concern, but a great hope that what was done in the last number of years can be put together again, and that the next British government will accept and grasp that opportunity. That hope's there and that expectation's there.
One huge difference this time, says the SDLP. A vote for Republicans now means only one thing.
The vote for Sinn Féin is definitely a vote for violence, and while people lent them their votes in the last election in order to encourage them to go down the peace road, those votes will not go to them this time. In fact, many people have told me that on the streets.
There's only one issue here, peace. and each community wants that on its own terms. This election has not served to diminish that, only to sharpen it. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Belfast.
The Scottish National Party leader Alex Salmond predicted his party would win a barrel load of seats, sending party activists out to make one final push for victory. Mr. Salmond said they were approaching the election with high hopes and, yes, brave hearts. Plaid Cymru said the only way to put Wales on the agenda at Westminster was a vote for them. They claimed the Labour Party would treat Wales as a second-class nation, offering only a toothless Welsh Assembly if they won. And if the last day of campaigning seems similar to last time's, that's because it is similar to last time. Time went backwards on the old church outside Tory HQ this morning. Across the road through stiff upper lips, party bosses remembered how they'd played it last time.
What I see on the doorstep, what I hear from my candidates up and down the country, what I hear from our party machine up and down the country is that that is not going to be the result on Thursday. We are going to win the election on Thursday, and I believe we are going to win it with a clear majority for 5 years.
The difference out there on the doorstep with what we are seeing in the opinion polls is very striking indeed, very striking. This election is there to be won. Of that, I have not a shred of doubt, and I believe that we are going to win it.
But it's not just the Conservatives who are delivering a familiar message. This was Paddy Ashdown 5 years ago.
Your vote is not a wasted vote. Your vote is a principled and winning vote. Give us your vote. Give us your mandate. And armed with that vote and that mandate, we will fight for the things we have fought for through this campaign, right through the next Parliament.
But for Labour, well, old leader, wrong message?
Not only have we retained strength, we've added strength. And we've done it in the battleground seats, where this election will really be decided.
This election is not over until it is over, and we want every bit of support in this country for tomorrow's election. Every single bit.
Mysteriously, this afternoon, Big Ben was spinning forward. Must be something in the air. That's it from us. Back to you, Peter.
And Perkins. One of the features of this campaign, according to many political commentators, has been the similarity between the parties on many policy issues. The parties would dispute that, but all agree the party leaders would bring a different approach and style of leadership if elected. So what has shaped the lives of the three contenders? And what, in turn, does that tell us about their capacity for leadership? Our political correspondent Nick Robinson examines their early years and the events that have made them the men they are.
This middle-class, middle-aged man has led Britain for the past 6.5 years. This middle-class, middle-aged man wants to replace him for the next 5 years at least. And so does this one, although he knows that the best he can hope for is a share of power. But what has made them the men they are and the national leaders they would be? Each became party leader during a crisis, and each was shaped by a trauma in their childhood. The eldest of the party leaders was born Jeremy John Durham Ashdown in New Delhi in India in 1941, the eldest son of an Indian Army colonel. His family then moved to Northern Ireland. It was the Irish accent he acquired there which earned him the nickname Paddy when he went to the public school in England. It stuck ever since. Leaving school, he plunged into training with the Marines. The Ashdowns' business had collapsed, so at the age of 16, he'd taken a scholarship to help the family make ends meet. Soon after, his parents decided to start a new life in Australia. So months after signing up, Paddy was alone. It's not something he likes to dwell on, but he has said that the pain of being left behind was absolutely dreadful. John Majors used the story of his childhood to sell his political philosophy. The Major Balls, their full name, lived in a comfortable suburb in Surrey, where his father, once a circus performer and music hall entertainer, made garden ornaments. John was just 12 years old when that business went bust. The family had to move from the suburban comfort of Worcester Park to inner-city hardship. It's a journey the Prime Minister's often recalled.
We used to come in and buy kippers.
Well, we still sell the kippers in the back.
Some kippers.
Yeah.
He returned to Brixton for a now famous party election broadcast.
from a fairly pleasant, though modest bungalow with a large garden and a pond, we moved to the fourth floor of an old Victorian building, and we had 2 rooms and a landing, and there were the 5 of us.
Friends from the time say John Major's ambition was to help people to get out of places like Cold Harbour Lane. Tony Blair was born just before John Major's move to Brixton. His was a classic middle-class upbringing. His father wanted to be an MP, a Conservative MP. Tony was sent to private schools, but there was trauma in his life too. At Durham choristers, the seeds of his religious faith were planted. At the age of 10, he learnt that his father had had a stroke and might die. It was an experience which Tony Blair has often talked of publicly, saying it taught him about the insecurity of life and drove him on to succeed.
And when he came back home, he really couldn't do anything, which was very tough for him because he was a public speaker. He was a good public speaker, he was a barrister, he was a good public speaker. So all those things had to stop, and he had to give up his political ambitions.
Tony Blair has fulfilled his father's ambitions, and he's changed Labour so that former Tories like his father feel at home. It's not just character and background which determines whether someone is fit for number 10, it's leadership skills. So what evidence is there in the early lives of the men seeking power in tomorrow's election that they've got the ability to lead?
Britain's Marines are protecting 80 miles of Sarawak's 600-mile frontier.
Paddy Ashdown's early claim to leadership is the clearest. He led special troops in Borneo and elsewhere.
At this post, 20 yards from the border, 23-year-old Marine Lieutenant Ashdown from Somerset has local forces as well as Marines under his command.
Whilst seen as a good leader, friends say Ashdown wasn't a born soldier, and he's still haunted by the memory of seeing a man through his rifle sight and pulling the trigger. He says he would never have made a general and soon switched to a diplomatic career. It was then he was attracted to politics, horrified by the effects of the 3-day week. Ashdown points to his CV as evidence of his suitability for political office.
Jeremy John Durham Ashdown.
It took Paddy Ashdown 10 years of local politics and 2 spells on the dole before he was elected to Parliament for Yeovil in 1983.
How lovely to see you, my dear.
One of Ashdown's colleagues in the Marines, reunited with him last week, says it's his drive which marks him out.
He would always go at things at 100% or 200%. And we've told him before that 150% would be enough. He's always had this ability to drive himself and drive other people as well.
On a dance floor in the town hall, the people of Lambeth offered a hand of welcome to their coloured neighbours.
Politics came before career for John Major, growing up in multiracial Brixton. He joined the Young Conservatives aged just 14, a moderate Tory, anti-racist, when Enoch Powell was predicting rivers of blood. At 25 he was elected a councillor and soon became Lambeth's housing chairman. A practical politician, Major planned his career a step at a time, moving from the soapbox to council chamber to Parliament. He was even photographed touring local housing estates on his wedding day. The classic Tory route to power followed. First an unwinnable seat, then a safe one. Major was elected when Margaret Thatcher won the 1979 election, an entirely conventional climb up the greasy pole. So was there early evidence of leadership? You needed something special to build a career from this street in Brixton, says a friend from those days.
Of course there was evidence for leadership. He set up and masterminded the Conservative campaign here in Brixton, one of the most difficult places you could do so. And he led from the front. He was the man, or the young man then, who would stand on the soapbox on a Saturday morning in Brixton Road telling people what was wrong with the Labour Party in Lambeth and what was wrong with the Labour Party.
Whilst John Major was on his Brixton soapbox, Tony Blair was here at Fettes, Scotland's top public school. He's remembered for rebelling against its austere atmosphere and rigid rules, and wasn't considered prefect material. A keen debater and actor, Blair was charismatic, but showed little interest in running things. At Oxford, although still not involved in politics, his ideas began to take shape. The amateur Mick Jagger, above all, had fun. It was as a young barrister that Tony Blair turned to politics and was soon chosen to fight, and lose, a by-election for his party. In 1983, Labour's low point, he became a Member of Parliament. an effortless move into politics by an impressive and engaging young man. But did he look like a leader? A friend from school days and still today says it was only later that Tony Blair's leadership skills became evident.
Well, I couldn't say that he, in first impressions, or even for the whole time I knew him at school, he was earmarked as a future leader or anything like that. But I suppose he did stand out. He did have some sort of charisma. But like everyone else, I think he just kept his head down and got on with things that had to be got on with at school.
Tony Blair's claim to national leadership is based on the determination and resolve he's shown since becoming leader of his party, filling the vacuum left by John Smith's death. Paddy Ashdown led his party out of the ruins of the Liberal SDP alliance. It's his courage in standing up for what's right rather than popular, which he believes sets him apart. John Major replaced Britain's toughest post-war leader, Margaret Thatcher. He says that the quiet determination of the boy from Brixton has worked for Britain, particularly in Northern Ireland and in Europe too. 3 middle-class, middle-aged men, 3 different leaders. Tomorrow, Britain has to choose.
The pollsters are still at work tonight and they're picking up a late move among the voters. Here's Peter Snow with his final look at the polls of the '97 election.
Peter, there are 5 polls tonight, and in 2 of the latest there are signs that there may be a last-minute shift to the Conservatives. There are only 2 of them, and these 2 are based on preliminary figures to be updated later. All 5 polls show Labour with a lead that is still strong. Now, Harris, in tomorrow's Independent, puts Labour on 48, the Conservatives on 31, and the Liberal Democrats on 15. They stopped interviewing yesterday. NOP, for Reuters news agency, puts Labour on 50, the Conservatives on 28, and the Liberal Democrats on 14. Interviews yesterday. Murray, in tomorrow's Times, puts Labour on 48, the Conservatives on 28, the Liberal Democrats on 16. Interviews yesterday, updated today with a further recall of 300 people. Now, Gallup, in tomorrow's Daily Telegraph, whose preliminary figures put Labour on 46%, the Tories on 33%, and the Liberal Democrats on 16%. Polling very, very late today, interviewing very, very late today. ICM in tomorrow's Guardian, on preliminary figures, puts Labour on 43, the Conservatives on 33, and the Liberal Democrats on 18. Again, very late figures. That's a 10% lead there, and it was ICM who caused the stir last week when they showed a Labour lead of only 5%. So it's actually widened a little, although today's half of the sample shows the Tories closing the gap again. So late-minute change there too. So our final trend in the polls through the campaign. Labour starting in the mid-50s up there, but then drifting down to the high 40s tonight, with some signs over here of a final drop. And there's Labour's range, and on average they've shown a slow decline through the campaign. The Tories beginning within a point or two of 30 on the left there, and showing signs of perking up a little at the very end here. Their range showing little movement, and their average very flat. Their low final score in Murray and NOP has been keeping that average tonight from edging up at the end. So polls going in slightly different directions right at the end there for the Tories. And the Liberal Democrats, starting around 10, moving up to end here quite strongly tonight, with most polls putting them above 15 today. Now their range showing a steady climb, but on average they still failed to reach the 18% that they scored at the last election. Now, what could all that mean if it's any guide to the way people may vote tomorrow? Well, last time the Tories had an 8% lead in the share of the vote. And we now have Labour leads varying from 22% at the top end in NOP to just 10% in ICM, which has nearly always put the Labour lead lower than the others have. The average of these last 5 polls tonight puts Labour's lead on 16%. That's around 2/3 of what it was at the beginning of the campaign, so dropping. And remember, late signs of the lead closing could mean that it'll close further between now and the time polling ends tomorrow night. Now, here's our swingometer. And to turn enough of these blue Tory seats red over here and achieve an overall majority, Labour needs a swing of 4.5% from the last election. Now, the lowest of tonight's leads, ICM's, suggests a swing of 9% to Labour. That would see Labour in with a majority of nearly 100. At the very extreme bottom end of the margin of error, that could be as low as 6% swing to Labour. But that would still see Labour in, as you can see, with a narrow working majority. At the top end of the swing, suggested by tonight's polls, NOPs would push the pendulum way on to a 15% swing, enough to see Labour in with a majority of over 200. But the average of these last 5 polls is a 12% swing, which would, if reflected in every seat tomorrow, put Labour on a majority of 150. But when you look at how party support appears to vary from region to region, the outlook for the Tories is worse. Now, Gallup has analysed the answers of more than 12,000 people over the past 3 weeks and confirmed the impression they had earlier in the campaign that the swing to Labour is greatest where they can do the Tories most damage. In 1992, Labour led the Tories by 13% in Scotland, 21% in Wales and 9% in the north. And in the Midlands, London and the south, the Tories were ahead. That was the election the Tories won. Over the last 3 weeks, Gallup suggests Labour have increased their lead in Scotland to 30%, upped their lead in Wales and the north as well, and taken over the lead in the Midlands, London and the south. Now this would represent swings, all that would represent swings with the leads like that, swings from the last general election of 8% in Scotland, 12% in the north, 11% in Wales, and 14%, 17% and 16% in the Midlands, London and the south. And it's there in the Midlands, the south and London that the Conservatives have most marginal seats to lose. So, the pollsters have given their verdict. If the Tories win and the pollsters' final figures don't pick up a massive extra last-minute shift, then the pollsters are going to find it very difficult to explain away. Peter.
Peter Snow. And the main news again. At the end of the longest campaign this century, the party leaders have returned to their constituencies after a frantic last day travelling the country. Now, for a final assessment of the campaign, I'm joined first from Glasgow by our political editor in Scotland, Brian Taylor. Brian, you can overuse the word, but a crossroads campaign, a crossroads election in Scotland?
Just glancing at what Peter was saying there, it would appear that perhaps the impression one gets is that possibly England is following the apparent pattern that there's been in Scotland for quite some time, which is one of an apparent Labour lead nipped at by the rival parties, with, of course, in Scotland, the additional dimension of the SNP being one of the nippers. Now, with regard to the campaign here, we've had the appearance of a substantial Labour lead throughout, with the Conservative Party pressing home on the question of the union. They claim Labour's devolution plans would wreck that, and the SNP pressing home from a different dimension, claiming that Labour's devolution plans don't go far enough. The Liberal Democrats, of course, saying they're the guarantors of Home Rule. So that's been the nature of the campaign here.
What are the principal memories you'll take of this campaign in Scotland?
Oh, I think very much the one that comes through is the Labour strategy. The strategy of playing this in Scotland as a UK or a Great Britain election. In other words, not playing down devolution, I'm not suggesting that, but putting forward the issues of jobs, education and health first, and saying that devolution is something to be settled by a referendum question which would come subsequently. In other words, deferring, if you like it, in the minds of the voters and stressing what they believe are the principal concerns, of the everyday concerns, if you like, of the electorate in Scotland.
As Peter Snow said, it's an outside chance, but if the Tories were to win, what would be the repercussions up there?
Oh, very substantial. The party in Scotland is thrilled, if I can use a Scots phrase entirely, to the notion of advance, and I think there have been suggestions in previous electoral defeats that with the party so apparently strong in Scotland and yet not able to gain a UK mandate, suggestions of splits in the party in Scotland that may well become the reality, although nobody in Scotland in the Labour Party is countenancing that prospect tonight.
Brian Taylor, thank you. And here, as usual, for his final thoughts on the campaign is the BBC's political editor, Robin Oakley. What's there left to say, Robin? What are your most vivid memories of this campaign?
Well, I think the one moment of supreme raw politics that we had was when John Major first faced the difficulty of his candidates cutting loose on the single European currency, and he threw away the script, scrapped the Tory plans for the day, and appealed to his party, "Don't tie my hands," as he put it, at a very dramatic press conference. I think the impressions with Tony Blair are more of somebody who was a little bit nervous, a little bit uptight at those early press conferences, and then when I got off the bus with him at Bristol the other day and he saw the huge crowd outside the hall there, he was saying, muttering under his breath, "Incredible, incredible," and the sheer exhilaration that you've seen take over him in the last few days of the campaign, reacting to those crowds, the growing confidence. And with Paddy Ashdown, perhaps the moment that sticks in my mind is doing an interview with him on the ferry back from the Isle of Wight, and just epitomising the sort of relentless energy of Paddy Ashdown. He said, "Oh, the point we're passing over here, I did my underwater training 120 feet down from here," and just that is the essence, really, of Paddy Ashdown's style.
Now, you've seen Prime Ministers and those who aspire to replace them at close quarters over the years on the night the campaign ends and they wait for the verdict of the voters, what's on the minds of Tony Blair and John Major tonight?
Well, inevitably, the chances of victory in each case. And John Major, one has seen in the last 48 hours, he's fought a real campaign as the epitome of the Tory campaign. He's been out there at the front. But in the last 48 hours, you've just seen in the body language, I think, a degree of resignation. I think he's a man who feels that power is probably slipping away from him now. But he's a fighter to the end, and he won't admit that to himself until the verdict is confirmed in the polls. Tony Blair, I think there must be a moment of nervousness now. Can it all be snatched away from Labour? They've expected election victories before and not had them. And then there's the very daunting question. Everybody's saying he's no experience of government. Will he be up to it? Huge decisions to be taken at Amsterdam summits and things like that. There must be some nervousness with the anticipation.
Robin Oakley, thank you. And that's the 1997 general election campaign. 6 long weeks, millions of words, tens of thousands of miles, the pictures, the smiles, the handshakes, the adrenaline and the exhaustion. Now they can only wait for the nation's verdict. From the 9 o'clock news, good night.
It's the night that counts.
It is the one time when politicians cannot avoid the truth.
The night your votes are counted.
There we are, just checking it. Yes, it works. Good, excellent, right.
It's the decisive night for Britain.
I think we're set with this election to do the best BBC election we've ever done.
Election 97, through the night with the BBC. Tomorrow.